saw Christian's video. His ficus are so big and beautiful, so I said mine will be too. Wrong. This is what my little Tanike looks like today.
What are all these comments blaming me for their ficus issues?
Hello?
Hello, Peggy? Peggy's Plants? Hey, it's Christian.
Oh, hey, Christian, my #1 crazy plant guy. How are you?
I'm good. So, I was just watching some plant videos on YouTube and landed on your plant fails and... How do I say this? But did you just low-key blame me for why you got a ficus and now yours is dying?
No.
Well, I'm reading some of the comments and some of them are saying the same thing.
What?
That they got a ficus because of me and then now theirs is dying. Did you just send a mob over to me?
No. Hello? Christian? I think we may have a bad connection.
I'm pretty sure we don't have a bad connection. It just sounds like you're making some sound effects there.
I can't hear you.
I can hear you fine, Peggy.
I think I'm losing you.
Peggy, I can hear you.
Christian?
Peggy. Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I want to share with you guys why my Ficus Elastica Taneki or variegated ficus is perfect and yours looks like crap. I'm just kidding, but for real, you know, Peggy was nice enough to obviously join me in that little intro. And I know a few of you guys also commented that the reason why you got yourself a Ficus Elastica Taneki is because you saw mine and you want yours to look like mine, but unfortunately, some of you guys are experiencing a bit of issues. And I did ask in my YouTube community for you guys to share some of the issues you're experiencing. And there was a lot of you guys who responded, over 300 comments. Majority of the issues that everyone seems to be facing, I think 90% of the responses were related to brown spots or edges on the leaves. There's a few that had concerns with growth of the plant, not growing at all, or if it is growing very small leaves. And there was a few that had like droopy leaves and whatnot. So I'm gonna try my best to really address a lot of those concerns or issues that you guys have, what's causing it and how to go about fixing it. And a way to do that is first I'm going to describe how I care for my Ficus Elastica. But I want you guys to keep something in mind. My location, my environment, the size of this Ficus Elastica, the size of pot it's in, the direction it's facing, the airflow, the potting soil, all of that will make a difference in how this plant grows and how it looks compared to what you have. Even if you live next door to me, and yeah, we had a similar plant, similar size, the way you care for it, the way you water it will impact exactly how your plant looks. So even though I know you guys are trying your best to duplicate what you see on social media or what you see on YouTube, the reality is it's not gonna be exactly one-to-one. What you need to do is take the information, the best practice, understand what those information mean and why I do it in my environment, and then adjust it based on your environment. So the way I'm gonna try and do that is first I'm gonna explain my Ficus Elastica, everything on how I care for it. And then I'm gonna use an example from one of you guys who sent me pictures and describe kind of the issues you're facing to illustrate the difference in how, you know, she was caring for her ficus versus the way I'm caring for it, and what adjustment I would suggest to correct or fix the issues she's experiencing, which mostly are browning of the leaves and the edges. So without further ado, we'll get started with how I care for my ficus, starting with the lighting. You guys know I have a large south-facing window, floor to ceiling, and I actually have all three of my ficus, the Taneki, the Ruby, and the Burgundy, upstairs in my bedroom, so they actually don't get any unobstructed view. It's full view of the sky, and I have these three plants really close to the window. In fact, some of them are kissing that damn window, so they get a lot of that bright, indirect and direct light from a south-facing window. So you can imagine the amount of light these plants get, because the reality is they will thrive under a lot of bright indirect light, south-facing preferred. It is gonna be a challenge if you only have a north-facing window. Even though they can tolerate low, medium light or north-facing window, the rate of their growth and the size of the leaves will definitely be a lot smaller or slower, especially when you compare it to someone like me who has it in a south-facing window. So that is something to keep in mind, is these guys need a lot of bright light, even a few hours of direct sunlight. Now let's talk about the potting medium I have my Ficus Elasticas in, because this is very important when we talk about the watering. So I have all my Ficus Elastica in a potting mixture that consists of 1/3 of organic potting mix, a third of cacti soil and a third of perlite. So you can imagine how airy this potting medium is, especially adding the cacti soil, which is a lot more airy than organic potting mix. And then you throw in a third of perlite. So it's equal parts of the 3 ingredients I use. And it's really nice and airy, but at the same time has enough of that soil from the organic potting mix and the cacti soil to retain a bit of the moisture. But I like this type of soil for most of my plants because the reality is I like to water my plants really thoroughly. So let's talk about watering. I'm going to describe how I water my Ficus Elastica, and then I'm going to share how I think some of you guys are watering your Ficus Elastica. So I allow the soil to dry out completely, not 3/4 of the soil dried out, or 2/3 of the soil. Pretty much top to bottom of that pot has to be dry before I start watering this plant. In addition, you guys can imagine that the potting medium I have it in, it's quite airy. So when I do water my Ficus Elasticas, that water really drains through. You guys can see right here how well that water is draining through. It's not dripping slowly, it is draining through, watering and washing all those roots. And that is how I go about watering my Ficus Elasticas. Now, some of you guys, I think, are not allowing your soil to dry out completely. And that is what's causing a lot of the brown spots that you're seeing on your variegated Ficus Elasticas, whether it's on the middle part or on the edges, especially when they start softening up. And you'll notice it at first from the bottom of the plant, and then it's gonna slowly, climb up if you continue to water that way. And eventually it's gonna yellow, and eventually it's gonna fall off. And I know you're probably saying, no, I allow the soil to dry out completely, Christian. But are you sure about that? Are you 100% sure? I'm just kidding. But so you guys gotta take either a moisture meter and stick it all the way in there as deep as you can and check to see if that soil is still moist or more on the drier side. The one thing to be careful with a moisture meter is sometimes they stop working. I've experienced a few of them, they just stop working. So I always like to use my finger, and I always like to lift the pot to make sure that it's light, or I'll use a chopstick to get in there and see if the soil is still sticking to the stick. If it's still sticking there and it's moist, that means it's probably not 100% dry yet. Now, that is one way for sure to avoid a lot of the browning spots that you're experiencing. Now, some of you guys also has a habit of partial watering. And what I mean by partial watering is, you pour a little bit of water in the plant and that water is not draining through. It is just enough to kind of just go throughout the soil and touch a bit of the roots, but it stays there. It's not flushing through. And then, a few days later, within a week, you're thinking, oh, my plant needs to be watered again, so let me water a bit more. And what that's doing is pretty much like collecting a lot of the moisture, and especially when you're not allowing it to dry out completely. And that's what's causing, again, a lot of the water to get clogged within the soil and the roots, and that's what's causing a lot of your browning spots and edges. These guys can tolerate being underwatered. They cannot tolerate being overwatered. So that's kind of my rule of thumb. Now, there is a drawback to underwatering, and I'm going to talk about that later in this video to address the droopiness or the curling of the leaves. The other thing I also want to mention when it comes to watering your Ficus Elastica is if you are allowing that water to dry completely, and when you are watering, you're seeing that water drain through, but you're still seeing brown spots or brown edges and you're giving it the right lighting, check the root ball, because typically these plants, when the roots grow, especially as they mature, they become really, really thick and really tight. So sometimes that root ball is so tight where water will actually get stuck, especially when you're watering in the center and rather than like around the pot and whatnot, which I like to do as well too. I want to make sure all the roots are nice and well watered. So I typically will have to actually get a chopstick and stick it into that root ball to kind of just help loosen it out. Or sometimes I will need to repot and just, knock off some of that really thick soil that's around the thick roots. So just be mindful of that. Now, in terms of humidity, these guys just get regular room temperature humidity. My relative humidity in my bedroom is about like 25 to 30%. So they don't need high humidity, to be quite honest. And I don't think humidity is the cause of the browning or the edges. It really does come down to the watering issue. You also got to be mindful on the size of pot you're using for your Ficus Elastica, making sure that it's not too big, where it consists a lot more soil than there are of roots. So you just gotta be careful of that. So that is how I go about caring for my Ficus Elasticas based on the environment I have it in. A lot of that south-facing, bright, direct and indirect light, a very airy potting medium, which obviously combined together will allow that soil to dry a lot faster and a lot quicker, and then allowing that soil to dry 100% before I decide to water it thoroughly, allowing that water to drain through. Very simple, very easy. Now let's take a look at Ashley's Ficus Elastica here. She sent me a picture of it and you guys can see she's experiencing browning, edges, and spots. She has hers located in a north-facing window and you guys can see she's, I think, in a high-rise apartment here. So unobstructed view, nice view of that sky, which is great. Unfortunately, it's a north-facing window and she'll get partial east or west because it's a bay window. But it's not the preferred light that these plants typically want to get, but she can't do anything about her lighting situation there, right? So, I mean, like I said, these guys can tolerate those types of lighting environment, low, medium, north, east, or west. You just got to make adjustment in the other aspects that you can control, like her watering and her potting medium. So I asked her, how do you go about watering your Ficus Elastica? She says she allows the soil to dry out about 3/4 of the way before she decides to water it. And then I asked her, well, how do you go about watering your Ficus Elastica? I was like, I just water it and then I see slow drips of the water drain through. So for me, that was a signal saying, okay, that potting soil is either not 100% dry, it's not airy enough, or you're doing partial watering where it's just, you're slowly putting some water on your plant and then you're walking away. Now, I then asked her what potting medium she's using and what's her mixture. So her potting mix consists of 3/4 of Pro Mix organic potting mix, not even cacti soil, but organic potting mix, and 1/4 of perlite. For me, that seems a little heavy for the lighting she's giving her Ficus Elastica, right? Because it's a north-facing window, it's not as intense, it's not as bright as a south-facing window. That potting soil is gonna take a while to dry out if it was, say, 50-50. 50% potting mix and 50% perlite, or add the mix I'm using, 1/4 potting mix, 1/4 cacti soil, and then half of perlite. And then in addition, she's also doing partial watering where she's not allowing that water to dry out completely, or watering where the water is draining through nicely, through the drainage hole and not dripping slowly. That is what's causing her browning right now. So what she needs to do is obviously make adjustments. Like I said, you can't adjust the lighting she gets. She gets a north-facing window, a bay window, unobstructed view, has a bit of east and west, but she can adjust her potting mixture and she can adjust her watering style. So that pretty much is what I would do if I was her, to avoid a lot of that browning and edging that she's experiencing on her Ficus Elasticas. And, for those of you guys who have, a north-facing window and you want to get this plant, just put this freaking plant as close to that north-facing window as possible. And if your view of the sky has things blocking, like trees and whatnot, get a chainsaw, go outside and chop off that tree. I'm just kidding. But seriously, these guys need a lot of that bright light. But like I said, they can't tolerate those low lighting or north-facing window. Just bring it as close as possible. I have mine in the south-facing window. It's literally kissing the damn window and it's happy, and I even allow the soil to dry out completely. So adjust your environment that you can control in order to give this plant what it wants. Allow the bright light, allow that soil to dry out completely, and water thoroughly. So now let's touch on a bit of the other common issues that some of you guys are experiencing. One of them is droopy leaves. And if you guys take a look at my Ficus Elastica teneki here, it's not perfect. The bottom half of this plant, you guys can see that the leaves are pointing down or a bit droopy, and it's even more obvious on my burgundy that you guys can see there. But the plant is perfectly healthy, it's intact, the leaves are not flimsy or soft or flying around when you shake your plant. And 9 out of 10 times, droopy leaves is a result of underwatering or the plant is thirsty. And I think this is my theory. So for those of you guys who have a similar look to my plant right now, where the bottom half of your plant is pointing down, the leaves are pointing down, and the top half is pointing up, it's a result of you being more on the underwater side, because I tend to be, again, on the underwatering, where we just spoke about how I would wait till the soil is completely dry, even waiting a few days after it dries out, or even a week before I decide to water this plant. So what typically will happen is those leaves are starting to droop, especially from the bottom, because that's the way plants will show you when they're thirsty, is they usually start at the bottom of the plant or closer to where the roots are. And then it'll slowly climb up. Because the structure of the plant is more on the woodier side, even the petioles are quite thick, the stems are. I think what typically happens is they get used to that droopiness look and shape, and they almost kind of conform to it. Even after you water it, it may lift up a bit, but because maybe it was drooping quite a bit for a while, it's almost like stuck there now. It doesn't necessarily bounce up or lift up even after watering it, even giving it a lot of light. So that's my theory. So for those of you guys who are experiencing like droopy and leaves pointing down, Comment and let me know if you tend to underwater your plant and you are one of those like me who allow it to dry out completely, and you're not, necessarily experiencing the browning and whatnot, because I'm curious to find out if that is exactly what's happening. For me, that's what's explaining why my burgundy, my ruby, and even a bit of my teneki has leaves pointing down, especially the bottom half of the plant versus the top half, because I tend to underwater. Now let's touch a bit on no growth or small leaves. So a few of you guys are experiencing small leaves on your Ficus Elasticas. And usually that's a cause of either not getting enough light. Like I said, if you are not giving this the bright, direct, and indirect light, south-facing preferred, the leaves will tend to grow smaller. The other thing to keep in mind is to make sure that you are repotting it at the right time and that that plant is not root bound, especially if your plant historically has been producing large leaves and all of a sudden started to grow small leaves. Just double check to make sure that it doesn't need to be repotted, because that can also hinder the growth of the leaves. Now let's talk about no growth at all. Dormant growth. A few of you guys have commented you've had your ficus for months and it's not growing. The leaf that is at the top is just not moving, it's not growing, it's stuck. So a couple things you guys need to do. One is give it fertilizer to wake it up and give it that boost. So use like an even balanced fertilizer, like a 10-10-10, 20-20-20. Dilute it, follow the instructions, and give it maybe like once a month until you start seeing the growth push out. And then from there, you can probably back off on your fertilizer. But another effective way, and you guys can do both, but the most successful way I've experienced growth on a Ficus Elastica and most plants is pruning your plant. So what you want to do is you want to take the top off, and that will encourage new growth. Now, I know some of you guys do not want to cut your ficus plants, especially if you are trying to go for this like single, stem look that I got going here with the teneki. But if it's not growing, a way to really encourage it is just to cut the top off. We're actually going to cut the top of this Ficus Ruby right now. So I'm gonna get scissors and I'm gonna show you guys where to cut and where the growth buds will occur once you cut this guy. All right guys, so here is our Ficus, AKA Ruby, that is now reverting back to teneki, and I'll talk a little bit about this, but I'm gonna cut this guy right here. And you guys can see that, you want to cut between those lines or those nodes where that petiole or that new leaf is shooting out. That is where you're going to see some dormant growth buds grow once you kind of cut this guy off. And what we're going to do with the cutting, we're just going to propagate it. And I've done a propagation video on the Ficus Elastica last year. So I'm going to link it over here and in the description below. So definitely check that out if you guys want a detailed example and a process of how to go about propagating your Ficus Elastica. But I'm just going to cut this guy right now. So right here. And normally when you cut, you're going to see the sap. It's right there. I'm just going to lay this guy down right now. And where you're going to see the growth is it's going to be off on this side right here. And that is where typically you're going to see new growth buds. And then from there, it's going to shoot out. So I want to cut this guy because I do actually want to try and get it to branch out. But that is one way to definitely get your Ficus Elastica to branch out. You guys can see here in my little Ficus Burgundy that I propagated last year, I accidentally knocked the top off, so it kind of just broke off naturally. And what eventually happened is this new growth on the side shot out, and that is what typically is going to happen when you cut your Ficus Elasticas. So that is one way to promote new growth, is just prune it. Eventually, you're going to see some new growth. And for those of you guys who are curious about the status of this plant, make sure you follow me on Instagram. We're going to do stories on it, documented, and just to follow along, see how well this is going to start growing and see how well we can get this guy to branch out, as well as the top cutting that we did. I'm probably going to, I don't think I'm going to propagate this guy into pieces. I think I'm just going to put some rooting hormone in this and try to get it to root and then just plant the top on a potting medium and see if we can get a new plant started. So that covers majority of the issues that we got from the YouTube community question that I did. A couple of other things. You guys have also asked about these white pinhead spots that you see on the edges of the leaves, like you guys see here in my Ficus Burgundy, or even on the teneki, it's a little bit more reddish. I call these kind of like freckles of the Ficus Elasticas, and these actually are kind of a part of the character of the plant, to be quite honest. They're not pests. I know sometimes we think they're pests right away, but when you think about the fact that these little dots are throughout the entire plant on every single leaf that I have, that is part of the plant's character. They're actually waxy glandular spots of the Ficus Elastica, so I usually don't get worried about those spots. When it comes to pests with a lot of the Ficus Elasticas, I find them to be quite resilient. I've never really had any issues with scales, mealybugs, or thrips or aphids at all. So for me, I think they're quite pest resistant. Now, another question is the variegation of the ruby. And you know, some of you guys were asking, you know, why is the reddish and the pink color kind of, you know, disappearing? And I'm gonna be honest, I really don't know the answer to this because this was a ruby and you guys can see the pictures when this guy was young. It had a lot more pink and reddish to what it looks like today, but eventually as this plant matured, it's starting to revert its colors and becoming more like a teneki. So it has more of that cream and that yellow, you know, whitish color and less more of that pink and reddish colors. Even though lighting is a factor on how well the variegation stays, I'm finding that the ruby, for some reason, it's just not staying as it grows. Maybe that's just my ruby, or maybe the plant I had wasn't really a ruby. But comment below if you guys have a ruby and if you guys are experiencing the reddish or the pink color disappearing as your plant is becoming older and maturing. So that's pretty much it, everyone. Hopefully you found this video helpful and that I was able to answer a lot of questions and issues you guys have with your Ficus Elastica, specifically the variegated kinds. If there are any more questions that I didn't address in this video, comment below and let me know and we'll see if we can get to them. And for those of you guys who are interested in the result of the Ficus Ruby, definitely follow me on Instagram and I'll do like a story highlight and we'll document the progress and the growth of this plant this season. So excited to see how he's gonna look come next year. Other than that, enjoy the rest of your weekend and we'll see you guys soon. Peace.